podcast.
We're making a podcast. I think the one thing you can't say about this podcast is that it is the newest podcast, potentially, as of right now. You might not be able to say much else about it.
The newest, yeah.
It is the newest podcast.
The premier Marxist communist podcast of all the podcasts you're listening to right now.
And premiere not in the sense of best, but premiere in the sense of newest.
It's premiering now. Yes,
now. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Or as soon as we're able to figure out how to do it.
It's a fringe screen at a fringe festival.
Yeah, exactly. But here we are.
Recorded in an alley.
Technically, we haven't decided on a name, but I think we'll just go ahead and make the editorial decision now of auxiliary statement. I think
pluralize.
Auxiliary statement.
This is the great rift between the two of us at the moment. Auxiliary statements.
It is. Yeah.
Neither of them roll off the tongue particularly well. They are Googleable, I think, but not particularly memorable.
Yeah. Well, memorable. I will say it's going to come down to whoever actually puts the podcast up.
Oh, shit.
Because if it's I don't know how to do that, and if it's me, I might do auxiliary statements. But auxiliary statements too, maybe. Regardless.
I mean, yeah, I think, I don't know about your disposition. Mine, obviously, as we were just saying, incredibly neurotic. So I fully endorse somebody taking an executive decision.
Yeah. Now that you say that out loud, I kind of don't really want to do it. Maybe, okay, so hey, welcome to auxiliary statements. Here we go. Auxiliary statements. What are we doing? What are we doing with this podcast? I kind of think we're doing a couple different things. I suppose, to kind of get started, I thought I would kind of have a bit of an information dump. So get ready for this, because this might be a little bit long. I figured I'd read one of the most quoted Marx quotes of all time. It's from third volume of Capital. And bear with me here, Dan, because I think this might be a little bit long. So I think we owe it to everybody to kind of explain the name, to explain what we're doing. So
Karl Marx. The name.
Yeah. To explain Karl Marx. But the quote begins something along these lines. It says, "The specific economic form in which unpaid surplus labor is pumped out of direct producers determines the relationship of rulers and ruled." Kind of blah, 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 blah. It goes on from there. "It is always the direct relationship of the owners of the conditions of production to the direct producers, a relation always naturally corresponding to a definite stage in the development of the methods of labor and thereby its social productivity, which reveals its innermost secret, the hidden basis of the entire social structure, and with it, the political form of the relation of sovereignty and dependence. In short, the corresponding specific form of the state." So that doesn't really explain the name of the podcast at all, but kind of he goes on later to say, and I guess basically what he's saying there is just that the economic form that we all have right now currently is not always the one that we've always had, and that it definitely determines a lot more of what we think. So, it determines the apparatus of the state, politics, art, to Marx also, social consciousness, social relations, blah, 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 blah. That's kind of like, the basics, or like the cornerstone of Marxism. But I think the reason that we came up with the name auxiliary statements, he kind of goes on to explain in a later passage, and I kind of think he expands in a way that a lot of kind of like self-described Marxists or communists or socialists don't really think about. And I think that this is kind of the crux of what we're trying to do with this show, right? So bear with me. And right now I'm quoting from Ralph Miliband's Marxism and Politics, which Dan has kindly lent me. This is the introduction, and he's going to be, I'm quoting him, but he's also quoting Marx, so you just figure it out. "As for Marx," he says, this passage from Capital just quoted goes on to say that, quote, "The same economic basis, because of innumerable different empirical circumstances, natural environment, racial relations, external historical influences, etc., will show infinite variations and gradations in appearance, which can be ascertained only by analysis of the empirically given circumstances, and these variations must obviously include the political part of the superstructure." So there, obviously, the name of the book is Marxism and Politics, so he's obviously kind of talking about the politics behind Marxism. But I guess, I don't know, what is he saying there? He's basically saying that we can't be economic determinists, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Mm. What did we get from that quote from Marx? What I took away was the history is made of determined stages, and those stages are primarily defined by the relationship between an exploiting and exploited, an exploiting class, a ruling and working class.
Yeah, also I guess what he's saying is that it isn't just economics, right? You can have this same general theory of history. You can have this theory that everything comes down to the relation of the exploiters and the exploited. the chorist and the choruses, something like that. But that it's going to show infinite variations, and so that any kind of like grand historical theme that you make, and I kind of think that this is one of the main, maybe criticisms of Marxism from people that potentially don't really understand it, myself included, is that it's just a grand historical theory, and as we all know, grand historical theories don't really hold up. Because like Marx is saying, there are just too many variables, right? So I guess that kind of like the name auxiliary statement kind of comes down to that idea in the philosophy of science of the auxiliary statement, which is a way to kind of like create an addendum to theories, right? Where right now, I guess there are a lot of people who are new to left politics and left theory. I hope. At least. I don't know. Maybe if you were just like an alien looking at the world, I don't think you would really think that. But I like to think that there are at least some new people who are going to be calling themselves Marxists or communists even, or, even just socialists, who might not have the theory or anything kind of behind their thinking. But if they do, I think that the broader theory will kind of take precedent over specific historical examples.
That's quite often what you're introduced to first. You either encounter some kind of small Marxist political party, what you might pejoratively call a sect, usually in the Marxist-Leninist, Trotskyist
Love it.
vein, which will usually require you to learn of a whole series of like doctrinal statements, usually
dogmatic,
potentially dogmatic. What often come across as quite calcified, quite stuck in a particular historical period. I know for me, for quite a long time, I've wanted to adhere to these ideas. I felt some kind of fidelity to this history, these thinkers. I've wanted these oft quoted statements of Marx or Lenin or someone else to mean something, and for me to have some meaning to them. But at the same time, they always struck me as just doctrinal or dogmatic, quoted to fill a particular gap in a well-trodden and sort of like quite tired debate between two groups. This is the line that you trot out at this point to rebut this idea, and it never felt living or particularly useful.
Absolutely.
And you sort of like come away being like, what is it that I've experienced? What have I learned from this? Like, somewhat rebuffed, kind of like. But there's that, and then there's also the training that you get in academia. And if your academic training in Marxism doesn't come from literary studies or
definitely not real
literature or cultural studies or what have you, which is something that I don't have any great experience of, so I'm not quite sure what that experience is. But if it's not coming from that, then quite likely it's coming from sociology, where you get first week Marxism. You get some basic statements like what you were just describing. Marx is some kind of economic determinist. A brief overlay of like the ideas of historical materialism, of historical stages of development. Some stuff about the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, and Marx thought that all political sociological action just came from the butting up against one another of these two great classes, kind of thing. And then you move on to Max Weber, and you're told that sort of like maybe Marx's writing had some meaning for his time, but no longer. And so you're introduced to something more modern and like. And so either way, what you come away with this idea of Marxism as being quite tired, 150 years out of date. Of little use, and a sort of like a horse being flogged by a small number of people for not particularly rationalizable ends gains, and you just come away alienated.
Yeah, well, that's the thing too. I mean, I think you hit on like a good idea, which is that Marxism is very much taught as grand historical theories, right? It is very much taught as like, Marx thought that historical materialism was like the thing, and that like you couldn't look at anything else, and like, what are you, a volunteerist or like something like that? And like, you're taught that his ideas are very much set in stone, and that they're not very dynamic, right? Whereas I think when you take a closer look, you see that they very much are absolutely dynamic, right? And so I think I'm going to quote again from another source. This is from another book Dan lent me, or at least took photos of certain pages and sent to me. This is from Alan Gilbert's Marxist Politics, Communists and Citizens, I believe. I can't really read that last word that I wrote down, but I believe it's citizens. Marxist, Dan's holding it up. Communists and Citizens by Alan Gilbert. Okay, perfect. So this is, again, from the introduction of that book, and he kind of tries to explain the idea of auxiliary statements, right? And so he says, the concept of auxiliary statements as used in the philosophy of science may clarify the relationship between Marx's general theory and his specific strategies and explanations. According to Hilary Putnam, a general scientific theory gains acceptance through striking successes, as when Newton derived Kepler's laws from his theory of universal gravitation. Yet a successful theory confronts many problems as it is not yet solved, and some that may be simply too difficult to solve. Right, and so then I'm skipping a little bit, but he goes on to say, Putnam notices a general dialectic of prediction and explanation in science, which also exists in Marx. When astronomers observed the deviant orbit of Uranus, for example, they did not doubt the theory of universal gravitation. Instead, Adams in England and Leverrier in France simultaneously predicted the existence of another planet whose gravitational pull would account for the deviation. Astronomers subsequently discovered Neptune. A failure of explanation led to a successful prediction. The existence of Neptune then served as a new auxiliary statement to correct the general theory's explanation of the orbit of Uranus. And in the 1840s and 1850s, Marx predicted that English workers would soon form a strong socialist movement. Despite the continuing oppressiveness of capitalism, they did not. Confronted with this failure, Marx examined the social and political divisions within the English working class more closely and offered a new auxiliary statement on the political consequences of English colonialism. Now, Marx envisioned internationalism on the Irish question not only as a moral obligation for the English working class, but also as a political necessity. The continued thraldom of Ireland presented a chief obstacle for socialism in Britain. So basically, kind of a little bit of just short background on that is he's basically saying that the continued oppressive actions of the British government, the English government, I suppose, on the immigrant Irish citizens who were mainly working class led to kind of a failure of coherency among the greater working class of all of England and of the United Kingdom. Anyway, the reason that we brought that up is to basically say that instead of just throwing out his whole idea of economic circumstances dictating political reality and what the state does and all this jazz, he was able to make his idea more dynamic, right? So he didn't just completely throw it out, because obviously there was still friction between the working class and the oppressors, right, and the ruling class. But he was able to come up with an auxiliary statement, much like they did to discover a planet, which I think is pretty impressive. Yeah, and so I guess that's kind of what we're at least attempting to do, is to attempt to make some kind of like modern left dogmatism, I suppose. I don't want to be too harsh, but a little bit more dynamic, right? And we're certainly not trying to gatekeep, because at least in my case, I don't think I know enough to gatekeep.
Yeah, if you were going to make a really broad, sweeping generalization of what the left has done since the death of Marx, and it's entirely not I'm sure there are many cases of people going in different ways, people adding new things to the theoretical framework,
to the mix.
But if you were to make said sweeping generalization, you might say that Marx had a particular approach to theory and to practice, to grappling with the world in which he lived and his political engagements in that world, which I think it would be fair to say his primary concern was always to make political change.
Absolutely.
He was a political actor and a political agent, in different ways in his life, right? Sometimes active revolutionary, sometimes scholar, obviously, sometimes sort of writer of scathing polemic for hundreds and hundreds of pages.
Classic.
But the reason why Alan Gilbert in this book, Marxist Politics, he takes from Hilary Putnam this idea of the auxiliary statement, an idea nothing to do with Marxism per se, in an attempt to try and explain what it is that Marx is doing. We all know that Marx wrote these huge tracts in great detail explaining the inner workings of capitalism. I mean, most notably the volumes of Capital, and the various notes that are an addendum to that, or his various notes that aided him in the writing of Capital. But I mean, even in Capital, Marx was engaged in a process of logical reasoning more than description of the world in which he lived. Right? He attempted to work out what the fundamentals of capitalism were, regardless of the time period in which capitalism was in existence. So if I can make that more clear, he wasn't particularly explaining the world as it was in which he was living, or the form of capitalism under which he lived. He attempted to discern and distill the fundamentals of the operating of capitalism as it would exist in its entirety, given that we've already said that Marx saw history in a series of particular phases, and those phases were determined by particular economic hallmarks, signposts, variables, most notably the relationship, the means by which wealth was extracted from one class and consumed and hoarded by another. But that doesn't then mean that all Marx gave us was this great study for us to sort of like interpret and work with. What he then did was worked on applying his theories to the world, and he was always prepared to meet failure and reinterpret his theories and come again. When a prediction that he'd made didn't meet with the way that things went, well, he adapted the theory, but it didn't necessarily invalidate the entirety of his work.
Well, right. I mean, I guess there's a reason that I guess history hasn't played out exactly the same in every single country, right? I mean, there's a reason we haven't like had a socialist revolution in every single country in the exact same way, right? And I mean, that's just basically the idea of the auxiliary statement, which is to kind of not disprove the general thesis, and in this case, not disprove general thesism behind Marxism, but to kind of expand on them, to really make an academic and scientific study of how and why this theory or theories might work, how come sometimes they don't, and to kind of just go from there. And I guess, I suppose we should have a little bit of background on ourselves, just because, I mean, at least for myself, I don't kind of really tend to think of myself as really falling into any kind of like leftist, kind of like clique. I don't know. Maybe that's just because I'm not, I don't know, as academic or as well-read as I should be. Dan's a bit of a Jucheist. Dan's very into Juche, I will say. So you might get a little bit of bias towards the Un family from him. It doesn't come from me. But I guess, I mean, just to kind of give a little bit about ourselves, kind of how we wound up here. I think for me, I'm like, I guess fairly typical in terms of like modern millennial leftist. Growing up, I kind of always gravitated towards like the left of the American Democratic Party, right? Which, like, is to say for like a lot of my life, that was like John Kerry, or like, Al Gore, and then like Obama. Wow, Obama was like really progressive. But then I think a big turning point for me came 2016, obviously, when Bernie ran. And I was like, oh, wow, there's a thing called democratic socialism. Oh my God, that's crazy. That seems so neat. And then by the time Bernie ran in 2019, again, 2020, I was more or less kind of like a communist. But it was funny because it wasn't until I moved out here, and here being the UK, that I really kind of discovered that like there still were communists, you know what I mean? Which is like, I think, a pretty big indictment of like, the United States, or maybe just like the coastal United States, or just kind of like where I grew up. But like I said, kind of growing up, I was definitely part of a family that like always went to anti-war rallies, and like war was like the biggest kind of like radicalizing thing, I suppose, for me. But then by the time I came out here, and I saw that like in my university there was like a Marxist reading group, I was like, oh, I'll go to that. I'll see what that was about. I'll see what that's about. And then I was kind of like surprised that it was like academics. I thought it was just going to be like a bunch of like pot smoking hippies and like, like, whoa, like far out, like I'm an anarchist, like punks kind of thing. But it's like, no, it's like actually guys with like corduroy jackets and like, elbow patches and like saying things that were completely above my head. And so I guess, I don't know, from there, I was kind of just fascinated with this kind of like academic and like scientific approach to leftism. And I'm definitely still on that journey, and I think that that's part of what this podcast is, right? Is it's going to be kind of self-educational for both of us. So yeah, Dan, tell us a little bit about you, and maybe skip over the parts about where you defected to Pyongyang.
I'm gonna have a big long pause to think. We'll just edit it. Just doing giving you some editing work to do. Let's face it, there's gonna be a lot of that.
There's gonna be a lot. There's gonna be a lot of like me breathing in and then it cutting to me talking. It's like, wow, did he do that?
Oh, Jack's talking again, and he's just cut all of that. No. Dan's talking again, and Jack's just cut all of himself out because he can't stand it.
Yeah. Wow, Jack sounds a lot like they just ripped Terry Eagleton's voice from the lecture series.
Yeah, we could just collect together a lot of them. I mean, maybe that's the option, right? You just have us rambling and then cut to somebody more, a clip from YouTube that's far more authoritative. Yeah. You just cut that in.
Yeah. Wow, Dan, I didn't realize you were the head of the CPGB. Cool. Good to know. Thanks for setting up the communist schools. That was a really good idea.
I think I've always it came from a family where politics was quite active and lived, mostly on my mum's side, anti-war, anti-nuclear weapons. Went to all of the Stop the Iraq War rallies, or a great many of them through the.
Let me just interrupt you for a sec. I just heard recently that very soon after America announced that we were just going to invade Iraq for pretty much no discernible reason, the protests that happened immediately after that were the largest single-day protests in history, which I think is insane. Worldwide protest.
Oh, you mean the number of people protesting worldwide?
Worldwide, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Not like in one place or anything.
Sure,
but I thought that was insane.
Yeah.
And
it's massive.
And we stopped the war.
Yeah.
So good for us.
And it's just been we're just one step toward utopia every year. So
exactly. Yeah. Stunning.
Nothing has happened. Nothing's gone wrong.
Yeah. Anyway, welcome back to the Activist Podcast. Anyway, sorry.
And socialism was a word which I knew and associated with myself to some extent, and people in my family and people around me. And I think for a while I would have rhetorically called myself a communist even. Mostly, I don't know whether it was in an effort to be edgy or...
It still is.
I don't know. Or maybe it was something that was I somehow managed to articulate briefly once and then became associated with me from other people. But at a certain point, what I realised I actually was a social liberal. Meaning a liberal minded toward how to generate positive social outcomes rather than some kind of economic liberal. So it was at a point when everybody had sort of realised that, he's the edgy communist friend. I was like, well, actually, I've been to university now, and I did one course, and now I consider myself to be a social liberal, actually.
Actually, I ordered a Lenin hat off of Amazon, so I'll have you know that I'm actually a Marxist-Leninist and not a Stalinist.
Yeah, a really significant distinction to be made there. I did that for a little while, maybe all of my university years, and then met some anarchists around the 2010 student protests. Was initially very put off by I don't quite know why or what the problem was. I think maybe I was just looking for nice, happy reconciliations, and what they seemed to offer was mostly antagonism. And I guess at some point I realised antagonism's cool, or some such. Anyway, yeah, I drifted toward anarchism. I don't quite know when or why or what happened, how that sort of bug got in there.
Oh, who hasn't at one point?
I know, everybody's had that phase, and it's remarkable that it didn't come from reading Noam Chomsky, right? Because that's how it's meant to happen.
Yeah. I was just going to say, in defense of Noam Chomsky, he's also a pretty big part of me discovering that there was something beyond American democratic liberalism.
Sure, right? Yeah. I mean his service.
Yeah. Because I was
it is immeasurable.
Yeah. I was like, America's doing what? Where? Oh my god. Yeah. Anyway. And now you're
sorry, now I'm thinking about the role that Jeremy Corbyn played for such a long time, being hammering on this kind of
I thought you were going to say
foreign policy stuff.
Anyway, now I'm thinking about becoming an anarchist.
Now I'm
again.
thinking about becoming an anarchist. I mean, I'm perhaps drifting back toward that direction, but that's something to be talked about later on, I suppose.
We'll get there.
Yeah, storied history. And then had the misfortune of adapting back toward something called communism, something adjacent to Marxism, through university and through I don't know what it's like now, but through political theory classes and spaces which were quite heavily orientated around structuralism, post-structuralism.
Sure.
And so what I ended up adopting or being introduced to was a sort of communist politics, very much in the kind of like Alain Badiou and also Louis Althusser to some extent, and then also probably adopted quite a lot of like philosophical ideas that are quite or sort of run adjacent and parallel to that, like making efforts to consider myself to be some kind of anti-humanist.
Cyborgist.
Yeah. I'm pro the Borg.
This is a pro-Locutus podcast.
This is well, I was always really put out. Okay, communist politics over. This is now the premier Star Trek podcast that you're listening to right now. I was really always put out by the idea that the Borg needed some kind of human. This is when I was in. This is my sort of like a phase of being a heavy analyst of Star Trek. Also corresponding with my phase of being. I mean, anyway. Yeah, phase. Yeah. My phase of being a heavy analyst of Star Trek also coincided with my phase of being someone influenced by post-structuralism. What are you going to do?
Interesting.
But yeah, and also anarchism to some extent. I was always really put out by the idea that the Borg needed a human being, needed a human, human element kind of thing. Like the case they always made was that somehow what I understood to be the case that was being made was that the Borg collective was lacking something which, like the individual creativity of human beings, there was something privileged and special about the human being that the Borg somehow lacked, and they needed to have some kind of element that wasn't just a drone, had some kind of like semi-individualistic capacities, and also I mean that interpretation I would reject now. The idea that they needed some kind of leader is still sort of perhaps problematic. Like,
sure,
they needed
it's the
some
general
sort of,
intellect, the Borg.
Yeah, the Borg is the
that the baby brain is being a federationist of the Federation, and then the next level is being Borg, and then the final level is realizing that the Ferengi have it all figured out. And then
you'll listen to the Libertarian podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Dan and I had a weird conversation the other day about we're not going to get into now, but it was about phrenology and Ferengis, but we're not going to get into that now. That's another episode.
Impressive brain pan, that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, it is impressive.
Yeah.
The brow.
I don't know how much is like skull and how much is ear. So,
that's a good point, actually.
Large skull, bony ear.
Answer that one, phrenologist.
I don't know.
And then anyway, now you're here, and now you're a communist with a podcast.
You're not going to let me like.
I'm sorry, when you said that was a phase of Star Trek, I was like, oh, that takes us up to present day.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I'm also glad that you were the first one to pronounce Louis Althusser, because up until last week I was calling him Louis Althusser. So, what are you gonna do?
Yeah. I'm trying to rack my brain for some terrible pronunciations that I've done. Anton Panakuk, that's a difficult one.
Yeah.
Panekawek. Was going with that for a while.
Yep. I'll be sure that you pronounce the names first.
Okay. Well, you can do the French ones.
Okay.
Well, actually, that's not necessarily true, because Althusser is French, obviously.
Yeah.
If it's a French name that I've come across, then I can probably manage it.
I'll do the American names.
Oh.
Specifically, if they're from California, I can do that. Maybe.
You can just about manage that. So yeah, post-structuralist Marxism fading into left communism, a heavy phase of anti-parliamentary left communism, I'm not going to vote. What a joke.
Wow. How brave.
Trade unions are nothing but like
pawns.
Yeah, pawns to the system. Have no revolutionary element at all.
How long did you not vote for?
I vote. I went into the voting. I almost said voting booth. That's what you would say, isn't it?
Do you not have voting booths here?
What would it be called here?
That is what I would say.
Yeah. I don't know. I went to the polling station for the European elections in 2014, thoroughly intending to vote for the Green Party, and then came out having voted for the Socialist Party of Great Britain.
Oh.
An interesting organisation, which I won't say anything bad about now, because I view them with some degree of favour.
That's good.
But found the idea that I just voted for the Socialist Party of Great Britain kind of absurd.
Yeah.
And then, I didn't vote again until Jeremy Corbyn in 2017, I don't think.
Those were the years.
Those were the years.
Oh, great.
And
forgot about that for a second. I bought it back.
And so, yeah. And then, and then started drifting back toward, I don't know, rational shores of something. Voted for Jeremy Corbyn in 2017. Was like, okay, maybe I do need to take seriously the fact that there is a left-wing leader of the Labour Party. Maybe I shouldn't be pegging all of my hopes for political progress on some kind of insurrection, and instead consider there might be practical political work to be done, parliamentary work to be done even. Maybe there are reforms that are worth fighting for. Maybe. And then eventually joined the Labour Party, and for that entire period I've just been struggling to find a way to reconcile, I think, a practical politics directed toward something called social democracy, and a practical politics directed toward participation in elections, which might have a progressive outcome, and then also on the like every other day, still considering myself some kind of revolutionary communist who would settle for nothing less than the revolutionary overthrow of the bourgeoisie and
that'd be nice.
Establishment of workers' control of the means of production.
That'd be pretty cool. That'd be pretty cool.
Pretty. I
will say,
pretty gnarly.
I would be in favor of that. That'd be good.
So yeah, I think that it's a good way of defining perhaps what I'm trying to look for is one, a way to wrestle with and adapt, and even just basically to understand some sort of both basic Marxian, i.e. stemming from Marx tenets, and then also to look at Marxist tenets if they've become transformed into sort of like doctrinal or other types of belief, and work out whether they're of what use they are to us. Yeah. something the auxiliary statement. I guess that's what we're all trying to do here. I guess that's, to a certain extent, that's what everybody's trying to do, right? Is to just seek some kind of understanding. But no matter where you fall politically, you're gonna be kind of like off-put by a bit of kind of like the dogma of whatever, right? Of Marxism, or the perceived dogma, I should say, or if you're a libertarian or something, or if you're whatever else people are. So I guess we're just trying to understand, and we're trying to kind of promote what we might perceive as good ideas. And also, I just kind of wrote down a couple other tidbits just kind of like some interesting things I would kind of like to talk about with this podcast. We talked the other day about kind of just like this idea of like a brand problem. There's too much brand loyalty, right, on the left, because I mean, we'll save this complete discussion for another show, but I think we both really want to get into this idea of like, should we be calling ourselves communists? Should we be having hammer and sickles in our Twitter bios? You know what I mean? Or should we just completely start with something fresh that is completely inspired by Marxist ideas and communist thought and academia and whatnot? Is that all just completely ruined by McCarthyism and by kind of like the last century, right? I mean, can we just completely write the last century off, right?
So yeah, just that idea of like of brand loyalty to kind of symbols and things like that in the past.
I, for one, and I think you as well. I mean, to some extent, you're part of this generation, and perhaps the way that I'm not. In that there seems to be a great willingness amongst a growing number of people to call themselves socialists.
Sure.
And I sometimes wonder what that means to them when I'm feeling a bit more didactic, or I wonder whether they're doing it right and whether I can put them straight.
Sure.
And what it means.
Yeah. Or if it's just good intentions, right? And good intentions are there. Does everybody need to be us?
Yeah, well, it's certainly not.
Yeah.
Well, quite, yeah, and to expand that idea a little bit, like, what kind of knowledge of socialist and communist history would it take for people to take the next step?
Absolutely, yeah.
Can that next step be taken with very minimal understanding of that history, and working very not particularly closely with that tradition, even if they adopt some of the signifiers, or maybe we need to ditch the signifiers to win over maybe not you or I's parents, but like somebody else's parents. But actually be other than that, maintain some kind of like connection to that tradition and fidelity to those ideas.
Yeah. And that kind of leads me into the next thing, which is kind of just understanding the tactics that have worked, right? Because I mean, I definitely went through a phase where I was like, okay, everybody needs to know their European history from 1789 through 1918. Yeah, phase. Yeah, exactly. Okay, we're just gonna stop using the word phase from now on this show. But it's, you brought up the other day, it's like, do we need to know what happened in 1848 in Hungary? Do we need to know what happened in 1848 in France? Do we need to know about any of these things? And I'm not saying that to say no, we don't need to know our history, because obviously someone needs to know the history, but does the average schmuck need to have an opinion on the July days or the June days, or of Louis Napoleon ascending to become Emperor of France, or anything like that? And anyway, that brings me into the next point, which is just kind of
like myriad left-wing organizations have invested a huge amount of effort in training their cadre members to have all the right positions on all of the various different historical moments you've just described, and every possible theoretical difference that might have ever been had in a very particular portion of time,
and to have the right opinion about it, right? The right opinion.
And I mean, their idea is that those people are then going to lead the people who don't have the information.
Sure.
And then, I mean, there may be some truth in that, but it certainly feels to me that a lot more effort has been put into learning the doctrine than I don't know, practicing.
Or
trying to find a good religious metaphor or something like that. But anyway,
the Gospels.
Quite,
But
preaching the gospel. There's not a lot of preaching the gospel going on.
But yeah. I mean, I think we'd both also like to talk about the tactics that have worked, right? And I mean, that is certainly not necessarily a Marxist idea, right? Because looking around us, I don't think I need to explain that point, but. I think moving forward, if anybody does want to see any kind of change, which we all should, we need to study not just the things that we want to study, 1848, but the things that we kind of don't really want to look at, right? The things that have worked, meaning since the end of World War II, at least in America, like how has this ideology just been crushed, meaning Marxism, and really anything left of like Bernie Sanders, right? Although, speaking of crushed, how has that happened, right? How has like this kind of like liberal consensus formed in the world, and what can we learn from that? Is there anything to learn from it? I think that would be a great thing to talk about.
You're proposing the possibility that we might learn from the right in some way.
Yeah, learn from the right, learn from kind of like the center, like the liberals, learn from the Social Democrats. I certainly think that if we want to make a change going forward, we're going to need to, right?
Yeah, I mean, if only to rebut those tactics. We
Exactly.
From them.
Yeah. But I mean, one thing I will say is that, like, let's say the example of like a Cuba or something like that, where so much emphasis was placed on this cultural revolution, right? That worked, right? At least certainly for a while. But it really worked in America, right? And America just projects that ideology all over the world. And how has that happened, right? Because I think it is a lot more like slipping into kind of like a warm bath, right? For most people, for this ideology that everybody now is more or less kind of like comfortable within the like American political sphere. And I don't mean that to say like there aren't massive changes that are happening, but that ideology is comfortable for a lot of people, so how has that happened? How did that cultural revolution happen? Because I don't think cultural revolution is really only happens in leftist kind of theory, right?
Certainly, yeah. And I think that strain of American politics certainly mastered hegemony in a way that the left never succeeded in.
Yeah. So I mean, just ideology is just one part of that, I think. So, yeah. Like with the auxiliary statement, hopefully we won't be confining ourselves to kind of like the dogma of, I hate to keep using that word, but of conventional political ideas. And also, vaguely, I think further down the line, probably we'll wind up talking about the role of militancy, the role of reform versus revolution, and to kind of see if any of those are possible. Militancy is possible, reform, revolution.
Guns. Do we
guns.
need guns?
We all need guns. At work the other day, someone bought shotgun cartridges, and I didn't even know we sold them. And I was like, wow, cool.
Okay.
And I was like, here we go, baby. It's like, I thought that was only in America.
Yeah. You need to start preaching to that guy.
Yeah. Well, actually, I'm pretty sure that guy yelled at me for like 15 minutes, so maybe not.
Okay. Did you realize that he was yelling at you?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
He came into the warehouse that I work and specifically...
You might have to explain why you just said you think he yelled at you for 15 minutes.
Well, because there were two of us in the warehouse and he just was yelling like at the warehouse. And it was just like... Okay,
he was yelling... Yeah, he was yelling at the warehouse.
He was just yelling. Okay. He was just an angry guy. What are you going to do? Anyway, militancy.
It's a good look.
It's a good look.
Yeah.
To go into a warehouse where you're not allowed to be and just start yelling.
He was just testing the acoustics. I think he was like, hey, they're great echo in here. I'm just going to sound
They were good. The acoustics were good, I will say.
You definitely heard him with some clarity.
Yeah, well, clarity. You definitely heard him. Anyway, I think that about covers it. Auxiliary statement. Look at us. We're going for it. Anything else? Anything else you want to say? I mean, this is just an intro episode, I guess, right?
Yes. Yeah. All lack of clarity will be covered with further lack of clarity.
Yeah, exactly.
At some future point
and
in time.
We'll just fall back on the idea of the auxiliary statement being like, well, we're just exploring when we make everything much more confusing.
Yes. Yeah.
One thing
no effort to be to have mastered anything.
Yeah.
It's like,
no kidding.
We can wait for mastery until the judgment day.
Exactly. We're just going for it. I suppose we probably should have figured out what we're going to talk about in our actual first episode. Maybe we'll just expand on these two books. Honestly, Marxist Politics.
I think we should just do a classic. Read the book.
Okay. Yeah.
Talk about the book.
Talk about the book, read the book.
I mean, I obviously torn between... I don't know whether this is for the podcast anymore. I don't know whether any of this is ever going to actually get published.
This is just for our own sanity.
It's been a fun experiment to learn what it is like. Ostensibly have a conversation with someone that you're in a room with, but really be talking to somebody who's not here.
Yeah, the ideal listener.
It's very you are listener. You are ideal.
Yeah. Not you though.
You know who you are.
You know who you are, but you though, you're ideal. Okay, so yeah, let's just say that.
So maybe it is Ralph Miliband's Marx and Politics.
Marxism and Politics. Do you have
Marxism. I mean, this is why Jack's going to do all the reading.
It is Marxism
if anything, if nothing else has come from this, I've discovered that Jack has an excellent reading voice.
Oh, I don't know about that.
I mean, you dear listener might have to let us know.
Yeah. Let us know in the comments.
But
We should also
tweet it. Yeah, well.
Don't tweet at me. Don't tweet at me. Please, God, don't tweet at me. I
think maybe we just get everybody to tweet at Ed. We might just have to use
tweet
this as a way to tweet Ed.
Tweet at Ed. We'll put Ed's Twitter in the description. Go ahead and tweet whatever you want at Ed. His DMs are open, ladies and gentlemen. So we should probably sort out all that crap later. So maybe by the time this goes up, there will be a Twitter and like an email or something. There's a lot to be sorted.
I don't know whether how do we promote this kind of thing?
Yeah.
If we had a Twitter, campaign. We'd have to tweet things. Yeah. I suppose. Yeah. If we had a Facebook.
Not Facebook.
All of our you don't have Facebook.
How about we'll have the LinkedIn for the show.
Did you ever have Facebook?
I did.
Okay, and then you just got rid of it.
I got rid of it. Yeah, in high school, it just made me feel like shit.
What facilitated that or preempted that? Or?
It just made me feel bad. I just realized one day I was just like, every time I go on Facebook, I feel bad. Okay. And then I got rid of my Facebook, and I was like, I still feel bad, but less bad. And now I'm not just like projecting my anxieties on like bad jokes on my status.
I find that I just scroll. I just pick but there isn't really an emotional investment in it. Like I don't see anything that angers me or doesn't anger me. I think maybe either maybe I just don't get exposed to the right materials. I see a lot of articles that I'm like, I probably ought to read this. Yeah. Gonna read the first paragraph. Yeah.
I would like to know what gets promoted in your Facebook feed. I'd like to see. When everybody
very strange things are happening.
Yeah.
So I don't get a lot of ads. Right. Mostly what I get is promoted videos, sports, all sorts of random sports stuff. Because it's just my Facebook feed has just learned what catches my attention, so I'm scrolling past. I'm like, a video to watch, great. I can stop a brief hiatus from the labour of scrolling. I can watch somebody score a home run or
score a home run.
Yeah,
look at that guy. He just scored a home run. That's what they say.
I don't know anything about baseball.
You watch a lot of it.
Clearly, I watch a lot of people hitting the baseball.
They do hit the baseball.
And it's funny actually because I don't get a lot of NFL stuff and. That's the one American sport that I probably actually know anything about.
Really?
Yeah. I quite like football. Yeah, it's
all right.
So there's that. I saw somebody do an underhand serve in tennis the other day and got an ace.
Cool. I guess.
That's pretty impressive. It's pretty impressive. So sports stuff. I was watching a skateboarding video earlier from 2016. God knows why. And then there's all those videos that are like somebody makes a great thing and it's really nice sped up thing somebody making a table, and I watch half of it and then the ad comes on and I don't watch the ad. And then quite often because my brain has now been attuned to this kind of you see a video of somebody, it's a sped up version of somebody doing something that's kind of impressive. I found myself quite often watching. For some reason, it's just started promoted makeup videos to me. So I suddenly my brain's. I'm just
your skin looks great.
I'm just thank you. I'm just scrolling. Oh, there's a video of someone putting on an eyeshadow for some reason.
Yeah.
And it's just captivating, just long enough for me to oh, the algorithm has decided that I've watched this.
Yeah.
And now, 20% of my YouTube ads are for makeup. And so I don't know what it is that I'm giving to the algorithm or the advertising economy, but I think it's probably positive.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I was using Instagram a lot, I noticed that one of the things that it really pushed on me was Turkish street food from Istanbul.
Okay.
Oh my God, I don't really eat meat, and none of it is really something anything that I potentially would eat. But wow, it's so much fun to just watch it getting made. It's so crazy. So much stuff is just so cool. Anyway, this has been the Facebook sponsored auxiliary statements podcast. Tune in next time when we will be discussing. Let's just say we will be discussing Marxism and politics, at least part of it. Ralph Miliband. My cover's got a picture of Marx on it. Dan's cover, I'm not sure. Just a couple of colors.
Well, I think there might have been several editions. I have what might be a first edition.
Oh, wow.
I don't know. 1970 something.
Yeah.
If this politics seems out of date, it's because it is.
Yeah, in 1977, I think.
77, and you've got the 20. You've got the 2004.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Re-edition. unfortunately, my one has several pages torn out of the front of it.
Yeah, so we will not be discussing.
So we will not be
pages.
discussing the introduction between pages 4 and 9 in the 1977.
which is funny because I quoted page 8 in today's episode.
Yeah. Well, actually, no, because I took some photographs of your copy before I gave it to you. So we've both been working from photos that I've taken.
Wait, the photos were from.
Yeah, there are multiple sets of photos of pages.
Yeah, the confusingly named Marxist Politics.
But I quite like how that one has a preface by Ellen Meekson's Wood, who is someone we certainly will return to every week, perhaps if I have my way.
Wow.
And that preface is like sort of saying like Marxist politics certainly isn't in the place it was in 1977, where it was at this high point.
Gotcha.
And there she's talking about how in 2004 it certainly was at really quite a low point. And I find it curious that now we're 16 years on from that, and now we're maybe potentially on the way back up again, or at least
baby.
I
was gonna correct you on something, but I forget what it was.
Oh, just correct me on anything, and I'll just assume you.
This was
better.
a necessary correction. That was actually the foreword and not the preface, because the preface was by Ralph Miliband.
That old guy.
That old governor. All right. Well, I think that about wraps it up. This has almost been an hour long.
If that surname sounds familiar, it's because of no reason at all.
Yeah, don't worry about that. Anyway, auxiliary statements. If Dan has his way, which he will. Auxiliary statements, because why not? I'm Jack.
Dan,
Jack and Dan.
It's been fun.
It's been fun.
A grueling experience.
It's been grueling, and hopefully next episode we'll have a light on in the room that we're recording, because it's a little dark.
Oh, I hadn't experienced the dark.
Yeah, it's not bad.
You must be able to see me in silhouette.
Yeah,
I can see you. Yeah, I can see you perfectly.
Yeah, Dan is beautifully
just as much as I'd want to see.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see you next time. I don't know.
Some doubt.
The music you heard this episode was Music to Kill Bad People 2 by King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. You can check out this song and more on their Bandcamp at kinggizzard.bandcamp.com. If you like this episode, be sure and follow us up at Aux Statements on Twitter. That's AUX Statements on Twitter.com. And be sure and tune in next episode for more commie discussion. Till next time.